Hi everybody! So I watched the new Star Trek series that came out, and I'm so hyped and so thrilled, and I just love it. Finally there's a new Star Trek series, and it's got everything that I was hoping for, and yeah. There isn't really anything bad about it, but there were some things that were unavoidable, I guess. So let's start with the bad stuff, so to say, which really isn't bad actually. It's just unavoidable. The aliens look a bit different. The Klingons don't really look like Klingons, but that's unavoidable, I guess. And they couldn't really just name the ship Enterprise again, so they gave the ship another name, and it's actually a really difficult name. It's really hard for me to pronounce, even though I'm usually good with pronouncing stuff, and I even speak Chinese. But this name is really hard for me to pronounce, and I don't even know what it means and how they came up with that. And they named their ship that, and I can't even pronounce it, so I'm not gonna pronounce it. Really, really stupid name for the ship. But other than that, it's great. I love it. It's got everything that Star Trek is supposed to have, and it even got a lot of cameos with returning actors from Star Trek, mostly from Next Generation, and there's like one episode that's directed by Jonathan Frakes, Riker, and it's got the same, pretty much the same, the same producers and the same writers like Next Generation. And by now they've only, I think by now they've only released the first 4 episodes. So the series has just started, and I've watched them all. At first I was kind of skeptical. I was kind of expecting it to suck. But then I watched the first episode and I really liked it. And by the second episode, I discovered, well, this is how Star Trek is supposed to be, And the second episode was awesome. The second episode was, the first episode was good too. The first episode was where I introduced all the characters, and then the second episode was basically a remake of The Cage. Excuse me. And actually, for those who don't know, The Cage itself was actually a remake from a Twilight Zone episode. I think that one was called People Are the Same All Over. And The Cage not only ripped off the entire Twilight Zone episode for the pilot episode of Star Trek, but they also used the exact same actors. So even the pilot episode, the original pilot episode of Star Trek, was a total ripoff. So it's totally fine for them to do a remake, of the first episode. I mean, and it wasn't really a remake. It was another story with with a different crew, and it was a different story and different characters, It wasn't an exact remake. It's not supposed to be. More like, they're trying to honor the original series, basically. And it did have some twists and some very interesting things that the original episode, the original pilot, The Cage, did not have. It did have everything that Star Trek is supposed to have, and it had a lot of social commentary thrown in there, and it made it really obvious, and I love that, and it really was about social and political issues, just like it's supposed to be. And of course, they sometimes they really rub it in your face, And I like that. I like that. They make it very obvious that it's basically a social and political commentary or even satire, which it is supposed to be. And I love the ending of the Cage episode, which isn't called the Cage. It's called Command Performance. And it didn't only have elements from the Cage. It had also other elements. Because it showed how the other crew members had to deal with their captain and their first officer being captured. So it was also really, it was really nice look into how the other characters would handle a situation like that, what they would do in a situation like that, and they have a little mutiny, to rescue them. And that was really nice to see. And of course, they're all great characters and really, really likable characters. And finally, the way in which they were rescued, I mean, that's just the best, And it was funny. It was funny. I mean, it wasn't really, not all of it was funny. It was serious, It was serious, and you really felt with those characters being imprisoned there. But in the end, the way they were rescued, that's really, how a satire should be, and I think that would actually work, I guess television is the worst form of imprisonment, I guess. So how they were rescued, I'm not gonna give away the spoiler, but how they were rescued was really interesting, and that would have been interesting to see in the original episode. That would have been really funny, and it actually fits quite well because, I don't want to give away the spoiler. And then the third episode is already a pretty serious episode. I mean, that episode as well has some funny moments, but it's a really serious episode that addresses a really serious topic, and those kinds of episodes. There were some episodes like that in Star Trek, especially in Star Trek Next Generation. There was like that one episode where Riker falls for the genderless girl, the girl that doesn't have a gender, species that doesn't have a gender, and of course Riker, being the pimp that he is, falls for all girls, no matter if they have a gender or not. So insofar there was a similar episode, of course. But again, this episode brought in some things that were not addressed previously in like Next Generation. And, I really liked the way they did it, because, I don't know, Next Generation and even Deep Space Nine, I don't know if you know that, but originally the character of Garak was supposed to be, basically a homosexual, and he was basically supposed to, come on to Dr. Bashir, They had a very interesting and very complex relationship, and was great, but originally that relationship was supposed to be even a bit more interesting and a bit more complex, as originally, and you can watch it, you can see it if you watch the first episode where Garak appears. In the first episode, he still does that. He still kind of, there is some, sexual tension, between Bashir and Garak. As originally, Garak was played pretty much as a homosexual. They dropped that in the later episodes because they were like, no, let's better not touch that topic, which I think is a shame, because I think it would have been really interesting, to to see something interesting develop between Garrick and Bashir. Anyway, back then they didn't really dare touch that subject. But of course they touch the subject, and I think the way they're handling the subject is great. I mean, it is provocative. It is supposed to be provocative, and I love it. I love the way they're doing it. I mean, it is a satire. Star Trek has always pretty much been a satire, because Star Trek was always, and Gene Roddenberry actually said that himself, Star Trek was always just, supposed to be basically Gulliver's Travels, but since all islands are already explored nowadays, you can't do it with islands, so it's just, it's Gulliver's Travels with planets instead of islands. And that's why you have all those planets that just happen to look exactly like Earth. That's not a coincidence. That's intentional, because it's supposed to be Earth. It's a satire, and the Klingons and the Romulans just, happen to behave just like Nazis or something. That's also not a coincidence. It's, they're supposed to, there are some episodes where the Klingons and Romulans are obvious Nazis, and then there's some there's some episodes where they're obviously supposed to be communists. For example, Star Trek 6, where the Klingons were obviously the Soviet Union. And that's what a satire, a political satire is supposed to do. And Gulliver's Travels was a political satire. And then if you do Gulliver's Travels in space, then of course you have to do that. And I love that about Star Trek, and I love those episodes, and I love Star Trek 6 in particular, how it addressed the Soviet Union. Anyway, I'm digressing. Anyway, they're always addressing a political or social, various subjects, and basically satirizing them. That's what Star Trek is supposed to do. And I think the way they did it in this episode, it was great. They addressed a really serious subject, and they did it in an interesting way. Usually the way they do that is they switch things around. For example, there was like that one episode in Next Generation where they were addressing gender equality, and the way they did that was to switch things around. Have there be a planet where the females are stronger to the males, and that's basically what they did in that episode as well. They basically switched things around, which I think was really interesting, because that's actually what I experienced, because of course this episode basically, it doesn't, I don't know if it's correct to say that it deals with homosexuality. It doesn't really deal with homosexuality. It deals with basically how we raise our children, and it's because especially nowadays there are some children, that already at a relatively young age, they say, okay, they identify with a different gender, and in some cases it comes from the parents, but in some cases it doesn't. And it comes from the children themselves, and then of course, the question arises is, how the parents deal with that. And of course you have some parents who are just total dicks, and they interfere with that in various ways. And I was a child like that. My mother very much interfered with my gender identity because she forced me to identify with a different gender. I'm obviously male, but she was pretty much traumatized by men, so she blamed all men, and all men were evil in her twisted mind. When she had a boy, when I grew a little older, like 2 years old, and I started to play, and I wanted those little toy soldiers to play, she couldn't deal with that. She was like, "Oh no, those are evil things that evil men do. You're not supposed to behave like a man. You're becoming an evil man." And she didn't want that. That scared her. So she forced me to behave like a girl, and she actually for the first. Basically, for the first 8 years of my life, she forced me to behave like a girl, and I had a very long haircut, and I was never allowed to play with toys for boys. She always forced me to play, with like Barbie dolls and all the kinds of stuff that girls play with. So she basically raised me as a girl. For the first 8 years of my life. After that, she stopped because I just, I was rebelling against it too much, because I didn't want that. I didn't want to be a girl. I wanted to be a boy. That was in my nature, and she was trying to extinguish that nature. And of course, she beat me a lot. If I didn't behave like a girl and like she wanted me to, she beat me a lot. I mean, not just like this or on the butt or something. The way she used to beat me is she put a boot on her hand and punch me in the face with the boot, or punch me in the stomach with the boot. So she really and I was like 5 years old, so she really used to hurt me when I didn't behave like a girl like she wanted me to. But still, I didn't care how much she beat me. I didn't care. She might as well have killed me, because it's my nature. You can't change my nature, So from that perspective, I can really kind of identify with other people who had a similar childhood. Of course, I realize that most people don't have a childhood like that. In most cases, it's that the children themselves want to identify with another gender, and the parents don't want that. But anyway, I can identify with that, because I know what it is like, to be forced to identify with a gender that you don't identify with. And actually, my childhood is basically exactly the kind of childhood they depicted in that episode. Where there is a child, and it's born with a certain gender, and the parents don't want that child to have that gender. That's exactly what my childhood was like with my mother, and that's exactly the kind of childhood they're depicting in that episode. And I think it's really interesting, and it's an important episode. I think it's a really good episode. It makes you think, and I think the important message here is that don't fuck up your children. I think that's the important message here. And then the next episode, the fourth episode, basically addresses religion. It's kind of like Return of the Ark Cohens from the original series. In that it basically, it kind of criticizes organized religion. But again, you have a twist in here that you didn't have in the original series, and the way they did it, I think it's really genius. It's really nice. Because again, you don't have just like in the original series where they would just just blatantly criticize organized religion. Of course, they did it a little bit veiled. They had to do it a little bit veiled in the original series because, it was network television and, Anyway, again, in this episode, they have a little twist, which I think is really interesting. And so it isn't only, again, the episode where they, the episode I just talked about, with the episode that addressed gender identity, it didn't, what I think was really interesting was that it didn't take sides, it didn't say, oh yeah, all homosexuals are evil. Nor did it say, well, all straight people are evil. We should all be homosexuals. Homosexuals are so much better than straight people. It didn't do that, It didn't take sides. It just, because you have assholes everywhere, People are the same all over, and in every group of people you have some dicks. So I really love the fact that they don't really take sides and don't say, oh, well, this group of people is evil, because this group of people is not evil. It's, it's people who are evil, but not a certain group of people. And if a certain group of people is evil, then it's always because they slander and devalue another group of human beings, That's what makes them become evil, and that's why it's so important not to do that. That's why it's so important not to say, well, people, those people, this group of people, those are all evil, because they're not. You can't generalize it like that. So I really like the fact that they're not taking sides, that they're not saying, oh, well, those people are evil. Because they're not. The problem isn't homosexuals or straight people, and the problem isn't religions or atheists. The problem is people. Some atheists, they are fine. And some religious people, they're fine. Of course, not all of them, but that's not necessarily because they're religious. It's it's just, to make it simple, because they're dicks, I love how they did that in that episode as well, because even though basically, well, again, this is a whole bunch of Star Trek episodes, all jumbled into one, but expanded upon. They put in some things that were not present in the original show, so it's really interesting. And what I think is really interesting is that basically, I kind of had the feeling that, yeah, well, the planet, so to say, it wasn't a planet. They were like inside a Dyson sphere, which is another episode. Anyway, inside the Dyson sphere, which is basically a planet, there was a how do you call that? A theocracy, basically a dictatorship. Basically just, imagine the Pope or someone as a dictator, and you pretty much have the government in that episode. But what was interesting is that the problem here was that their ideology basically dismissed idealism, to make it short. Basically, they had a very material, even though it was kind of displayed as a theocracy, their ideology was actually materialist. Because the problem was that they only acknowledged what they could see. And of course, their vision was very limited because they were inside a Dyson sphere. If you don't know what a Dyson sphere is, watch Next Generation. But anyway, basically they were inside an artificial planet, or actually they were inside a ship. They were inside a ship that was made to look like a small little self-contained planet, and they couldn't see beyond the ship. So in that sense, it was actually a lot like Plato's cage story. And here we actually that's also very similar to the cage episode. So there's a little bit of connection here. So anyway, they're definitely addressing Plato's cage story. Anyway, these people have a very limited field of vision, and but since nothing under normal circumstances, nothing from the outside directly interferes with their environment, they basically come to think that only those things that they can see exist. And of course, as I said, their vision is very limited because they're actually inside an artificial construct. And so basically they're basically materialists, and that's the problem, because when suddenly outsiders from basically beyond their world come, they dismiss it because their ideology doesn't allow for that, because then they would have to abandon their ideology, which in essence was a materialist ideology, meaning that they only acknowledged what they could see, and since they couldn't see beyond their artificial construct, they didn't believe in anything beyond their immediate field of vision. So if something beyond from what they can perceive in their materialistic world comes into play, then they have to reject it in order to preserve their ideology, even if that might mean endangering themselves, even if that might mean killing those strangers, because they're interference, and I I actually experienced that myself, when I was living in small communities and small villages, it's kind of similar. When you're living in like backwoods villages, people there have a similar attitude, and they reject anything that anything from the outside, and I love that they addressed this, and I love that they addressed it in this way, because in this way it's not just your usual episode bashing religion. In this way it's not. Well, let's use another word for religion, and that is communities, because religions usually are communities, and what this episode is really bashing is ideological communities, whether they be atheists or theists. It doesn't matter, and particularly those kinds of ideological communities that exclude outsiders and that say that only their worldview is the only correct, those kinds of communities, ideological communities, and just like in this episode, those kinds of communities can actually be atheist or can be materialist. Good example would be communism. It even has the word in its name, commune. Communism. Communism is a good example. And of course, communism is also a great example, for killing everybody that doesn't agree with their worldview. I think that was a great episode as well. Actually, all the episodes are awesome. I didn't talk about the first episode because that basically just introduced the characters, but it was also a great episode. And now I talked about all the 4 episodes that have been released by the time I'm doing this video here. And it's a really great show. You should check it out. It's called The Orville, in case you didn't notice. And it's so much better than Star Trek Discovery. Star Trek Discovery sucks. Star Trek Discovery has nothing in common with Star Trek except for having Star Trek somewhere in its name. The Orville does not have Star Trek in its name because they obviously don't have the copyright. But it has everything else. Everything that Star Trek Discovery doesn't have. So it's basically the exact opposite of Star Trek Discovery. Star Trek Discovery has Star Trek, but in name only, and The Orville does not have Star Trek in its name, but it has everything else that Star Trek is supposed to have. I love the show. And it's originally I was kind of expecting, because when I said I was skeptical when the show came out, because I was kind of expecting, basically like Galaxy Quest, the series, Galaxy Quest, the show, and I realized it's not like Galaxy Quest at all, because Galaxy Quest was purely making fun of Star Trek. It was a comedy. It was a comedy, and it was poking fun at Star Trek, and that's all it did. I mean, it was funny. It was funny. I loved Galaxy Quest, but it was just a comedy. It was just making fun of Star Trek. It wasn't Star Trek itself. Whereas the Orville is Star Trek. They also have some funny moments. That's fine. I mean, Star Trek had a lot of funny moments. But even though they have some funny moments in there, it's still basically Star Trek. They have all the elements, and they're addressing the same topics and doing it in a great way. Even though they have some funny moments, when they're addressing serious topics, they can be very serious. And I love it, and it's just like Star Trek is supposed to be. And of course, they have to. I mean, I love the comedic elements as well, and they have to have some comedic elements in there, because then they can always say, oh well, we're not infringing on your copyright, we're just doing a parody. Which in reality, don't tell anyone. Which in reality, they're really not. They're not making fun of Star Trek. It's not really a parody. They're just, putting in some comedic elements so that that in case they ever get in trouble with copyright, they can say, well, it was just a parody, which it really isn't though, but psst, don't tell anyone.
California dreaming about you.